It only takes two people in that state of consciousness to create a ripple effect of healing on the entire planet. And I think that is why the stories about Jesus and Christ consciousness, that 3,000 years later we are still talking about that, it is because of the frequency of pure love. And I believe it is because of the frequency of Mary Magdalene. And that it was not just Jesus, it was the relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, that they were both in these very elevated consciousness, and that they were able to create a level of healing that we are still talking about. And yet Mary Magdalene got removed from the history books, like quite literally ripped, the pages ripped out of the books, the tablets etched blank, and we have purposefully and sometimes violently removed the divine feminine from our mythology. And I think that we are seeing the ramifications of that on the planet. We're seeing what happens when we just value one over the other. And so the exciting news here
Emily Fletcher, welcome on the show, or should I say ceremony. It's a pleasure to have you here. I was wondering if you would love to start off with a prayer for us to tune in into this sacred container.
I sure would. Thank you for the invitation. So for you, for me, for everyone and anyone listening, past, present, and future, taking a moment, if it's safe for you to close your eyes, if you're driving a car, you can simply bring your awareness internal. If your eyes are closed, allowing that sight to scan the inside of the body. We spend so much time looking outwards, safety, protection, validation. So closing the eyes if it's safe for you, or dropping the awareness inside and scanning the body for everything that feels good. Where in your body do you feel the most safe? Where in your body do you feel the most held right here, right now? Taking a big breath into your heart. Exhaling on the sound of ah. This time breathing all the way down into your belly. Again, exhaling on the sound of God, the sound of ah. And this time breathing down and dropping that breath all the way down into your root, into your hoo-ha, letting it expand and activate as you inhale, and exhaling, bringing that frequency of the divine all the way down to your root. And dropping two beautiful golden cords all the way down into the molten core of the planet. And as you inhale, breathing up that fiery golden grounding energy all the way up into your heart. Feeling connected to your body in this space, this time, right here, right now. Allowing that energy from the earth to travel all the way up through the top of your head, penetrating out through the top of your head and activating a crown, a halo, 8 inches above your head, activating it now. Allowing that to be a cosmic antenna, a funnel, so that you remember yourself as a channel, as a funnel, as a conduit for the frequency of heaven to be brought here to earth. Letting that energy flow from the bottoms of your feet to the top of your head and beyond. With each breath tuning into that life force, that flow of energy coming from cosmic intelligence itself and birthing down through every single one of your cells into this beautiful 3D plane. And from this space of connection and remembrance, activating a powerful iridescent bubble of light so that you feel held, filling it with the frequency of unconditional love and awe. And from this ceremony space, tuning into the frequency of your soul, the piece of you that lives on before and beyond the death of the body. And even if but for a moment of curiosity, asking the question, why did I come here? Why did I choose this body? Why did I choose this time? Why did I choose this podcast? Why am I here? And perhaps It was for the joy of being a human. Perhaps it was so that you could taste the deliciousness of your cacao and hear the beauty in your friend's laughter and to feel the salty burn of your tears on your cheeks. For a moment, when we remember that there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to get to, but actually we incarnated for this moment, right here, right now, with all of the agony and all of the ecstasy baked in to the ever-repeating now. From this place of intense presence, of intense connection, offering up the prayer that nature use both of us as a mouthpiece, calling on the spirit and the energy of our guides, calling on the higher selves and the guides of every single person that will witness this medicine as media, past, present, and future, offering up the prayer and the intention that this conversation be the exact medicine that they need, no more, no less, for theirs and for ours and for everyone's highest good. And so it is.
Beautiful sister, I see you. That took me right back to Egypt. That took me right back to just the vulnerable moments that we shared. And just to start off, I always like to tune into your excitement right now. So what are you most excited about right now in your life?
Whew. I'm in a real chapter change. I've had a pretty massive spiritual and energetic awakening over the past 3 years. As a result, my company has changed. The things that I'm teaching at Ziva has changed. My team is changing. My relationship is changing. So it feels like I'm in this moment where I'm kind of throwing it all up into the air. Again, like I did it in 2020. I threw my whole life, my marriage, my company, my identity all up into the air. And it all, it's like the house of cards, and they all reformed into something more beautiful and magical than I ever could have constructed. And it feels like I'm doing that again. And I'm throwing it all up into the air. And I'm so curious as to how the new castle will be constructed. and the thing that I know is happening, even in this deconstruction, is a balancing of the masculine and feminine, a healing of the masculine inside of myself, a really learning to hold myself in a way that I haven't before, so that my femininity can flow through, so that my full creativity and channel can feel supported by my own nervous system. So that's honestly the thing I'm most excited about is like the yucky, funky inner work and the therapy and the like gunk of it all, because I've just done this rodeo enough times that I know the magic on the other side of that is more beautiful than I could even imagine right now.
And just witnessing you say that, and that brings up also, I've heard you say before that the world has collectively gone through these series of near-death experiences. And when we say that, it's not even just literal death, but identity death, sort of what you are moving through right now. And if we tap into this Hermetic principle of as above, so below, I'd love to catch your feel for what is going on in the world right now in terms of these, cycles of death and rebirth that people are going through collectively into these, what we even witnessed in Egypt, which was this new iteration of a new frequency emerging in each one of us, and how we were collectively creating that, and how bringing in these conversations will also activate new frequencies. So what do you see right now as we're on a precipice of a new world that you can apply from your internal experiences and how you see that reflected outside to the collective?
So when I was 24, my father got diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer. And I was a performer. I was on Broadway. I was on tour. I was on tour with the producers. And you get a call like that, and you immediately think, well, how can I fix it? Well, we have to save him. We have to help him. And you think like, oh, it's cancer. We have a long time. But it was 1 month from his diagnosis to his death. And
wow.
And so, and my dad, like Southern Tallahassee, Florida, Republican, conservative, like listen to Rush Limbaugh. I mean, you know the archetype. So when I came home with my hippy dippy highfalutin, let's do some green juice and let's do some apple pectin. And how about this Japanese machine that I got that will oxygenate your blood? He was like, you can fuck right off. And like, just was not really interested in my like hippy dippy healing modalities. Also, this was 2004, right? So like it was a
Ooh.
different world than we're in now. It was 20 years ago. And so,
Mm.
anyway, point of the story is that like he then a few weeks later got sick enough that he was willing to take all the medicine. He was like, give me your green juice, give me your Japanese machine, give me your meditation, give me your whatever, I basically became like a makeshift cancer nutritionist in 72 hours. And so, but it was him facing his own mortality. It was him looking death in the eye that allowed him to be open to these potential elixirs of life and open to these modalities. And so when I got home the second time, when I got home, he was basically in a coma. He couldn't talk. He couldn't walk. He was barely conscious. But we started doing these treatments on him. We started feeding his body instead of feeding the cancer. And within 24 hours, he was up, he was walking, he was talking. And so we did not save his life, but we improved the quality of his life for the time that he had left. He was able to say his goodbyes. He was able to have be conscious for these final moments with his family. And so that was a big part of my awakening. But the way I see that playing out on the planet is like the whole world just faced its own mortality in a way that we haven't in our generation. And I think that it's allowed us to, it's not everyone, but some people are now willing to take the more potent medicine. They don't need as much of the candy coating. They're like, oh, just give me the medicine. And so what I'm seeing happening spiritually is similar to what I'm seeing happening economically. So certainly in 2020 in the pandemic, like the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, like the economic disparity increased. And I'm seeing the same thing happen on the spiritual plane, that those people who have had the privilege of having access to therapy and meditation and shadow work and medicine work and trauma clearing, they are popping off into very high states of consciousness.
Quantum shifts.
Quickly.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, like quantum shifts. Like you're probably seeing it in your world. Like people who, 2 years ago were like a pharmaceutical salesperson and now they're like a shaman in Costa Rica or whatever. It's like everyone in my world is now suddenly like a wellness person, which I'm here for. But then it's like they're ushering themselves into God consciousness very quickly. But the converse is also happening. People who have not had access to therapy and medicine work and meditation and community are spiraling and plummeting down into depression and anxiety and suicidality. And so where this feels confusing is that like you hear one narrative, you go to Austin or you go to Costa Rica and you hear this world of like, we're birthing the new earth and it's getting better and the light beings. And like, that's true. And the dark is also getting darker. Also true. And actually, our mutual friend, Robert Edward Grant, who I'm about to interview for my podcast, who initiated our trip to Egypt, the first time I ever met, or maybe the second time I ever met him in person, he said to me, as the dark gets darker on the planet, we have not only an opportunity, but a responsibility to bring more light. And that message really resonated for me. And I like to share it because it feels like it liberates those of us who are on the path, those of us who have done so much work to clean house internally and spiritually, that rather than feeling guilty for that, rather than feeling shame for that, rather than feeling embarrassed about the privilege of your own state of consciousness, it's like, no, you have a responsibility energetically to balance things out on the planet. And guess what? Your suffering is not helping anyone else's suffering. If you just look at things from the energetic plane, you suffering on the way to helping someone is only making more suffering. So truly our job is to like look at our stuff, look at the places where we don't feel whole, look at the pieces of ourselves that are keeping us from 24-hour-a-day bliss, from that beautiful integrated cosmic divine dance that is available to us really 24 hours a day.
And I know you are an amazing adept into the Vedic sciences, and you've been studying over 16, 20 years now of these texts, sacred texts from the East. And they even say there is no good or bad. This is one of your favorite teachings. There's only creation, maintenance, and destruction. And right now I'm seeing, more of your content, more of where you're shifting in terms of your messaging to the world. It's no longer meditate for better sex, better sleep, better performance. It's more so, how can you tap into this sacred energy, this creation energy of pleasure? And I'd love to touch on how you believe that pain is a necessary factor in this equation of liberating our pleasure in any modality that we try out?
Yeah. So, yes. So I'll back it up a bit and say that, if you want to manifest anything, right? And that's really what I do is I teach manifestation. My friend just reflected back to me like, oh, Emily, you actually have a manifestation company. You're either teaching meditation and manifesting with Ziva Online, or now it's pleasure and manifesting with Sacred Secret. And I was so thankful for that mirror because I don't know that I would have gotten there myself. But actually they're both the same thing, because in meditation, you're practicing dying. In pleasure, you're practicing dying. And what do I mean when I say that? It means you're transcending your individuality and connecting to totality, right? So that's why my modalities are medicine, pleasure, and meditation, because in all three, you are practicing dying. You are connecting with the thing that lives beyond the body. And quite literally, like, what do you call orgasm in French? Le petit mort. It's the little death. What do you do on a plant medicine ceremony, right? There's an ego death. You're like, purging all the parts of you that weren't working. What do you do in meditation? You're unioning. Yoga comes from the Sanskrit word to yoke, which means to union, individuality, and totality. So they're actually all the same thing. But the way that this applies to manifestation, and I'm going to get to the pain piece, is that my simple formula for manifestation is this: feel good, place the order, feel good. Feel good, place the order, feel good, place the order, feel good. So super duper simple formula.
Make that into a song real quick. Someone put a beat on that, please.
I'm actually, there's 2 DJs from our trip in Egypt, and we're doing songs together because this is my dream of dreams. Everyone is remixing Alan Watts, and I fucking love Alan Watts, but can we mix it up? Can we bring it into 2024? So we're going to make some dance tracks with some Emily Fletcher quotes.
Let's go. I love that. Let's do it.
So feel good, place the order. Very simple formula to understand intellectually, but harder to execute, because feeling good does not mean spiritual bypass. It doesn't mean putting a happy face sticker on top of an empty tank of gas. It means doing whatever the fuck it takes to feel good. And for most of us, that means going right into the belly of the beast. That means going right into your traumas. That means cleaning up your lies. That means doing the trauma therapy. That means going to actual therapy. That means sitting your buns down and meditating, especially on the days that you don't want to. And most importantly, that means feeling your feelings. I've been doing this stuff for a long time. Ayahuasca, darkness retreats, meditation, studying the Vedas. You name it, I've done it. And every single modality just comes back to this: feelings are meant for feeling. And if you want to heal something, you are first going to have to feel it. And this sort of answers your first question of what do I see happening on the planet? I see tens of thousands of years of repressed emotions that are coming out, that are acting out in war, in a raping of the planet, in a segregation from each other, in this chronic fight or flight stress reaction that we don't know how to get out of, because we've all been conditioned to think that our feelings are bad, that we are weak if we feel our feelings. And I would argue that nothing is further from the truth, that if you have the resilience that it takes to feel your feelings, it installs in you a level of strength, a level of power, a level of capacity that we simply don't have when we're brittly avoiding conflict, when we're brittly avoiding rage, when we're avoiding sorrow. And as this applies to Sacred Secret and the new body of work that I'm using, which is again, feel good, place the order. So how do we feel good? We got to utilize the most potent cocktail of chemicals that nature has installed inside of us, which is oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, adrenaline. And that cocktail is released when we're in these heightened ecstatic states, when we're building something that I call creation energy. So what is creation energy? It's the most creative force on the planet, and it could literally create another human, the most divine thing that we can do as humans. And yet every time we go into these heightened ecstatic states, we don't make a human. But that level of divinity, that level of creative power is available to us when we're in that state of consciousness. But I won't personally let anyone touch that level of ecstasy or pleasure in my ceremonies, in my work, until they know how to dance with the darkness, until they know how to feel their pain, quite honestly. So what we do in Sacred Secret is something called visualize, alchemize, magnetize. So I drop people in meditation. We visualize, what do they want to manifest for themselves? And not only for you, but also for the species. What is the more beautiful earth that your heart knows is possible? And then from there, we alchemize. So this technique is called emotional alchemy, where you basically give the rage the microphone, you give the sorrow the microphone, and you dance with it. You let it speak, you let it be expressed. And this was news to me because I am a recovering codependent people pleaser, perfectionist, conflict avoidant Southern lady, right? So like you name it, I've avoided it. I've just built a whole lifetime on avoiding conflict and my feelings. So this is new and scary territory for me. And yet what's been so liberating and resilience building for me is that I've been able to find the ecstasy in the expression of the rage. I've been able to find the ecstasy in the expression of the sorrow. And then that ecstasy becomes the alchemical force. That ecstasy becomes the thing that alchemizes the pain into fuel for your dream. And that whole process clears the channel for you then to magnetize your dreams by turning on that creation energy, by tapping into that eros, by literally turning on your magnet, which is your hoo-ha, by the way. And it's like you get your head, heart, and hoo-ha in coherence with each other, pointed towards your dream. And then the things start to hurtle, through time and space toward you.
And I wanted to highlight this sentence that changed the trajectory of your life from one of your best friends and Tantra teachers, Layla Martin. She says that ecstasy for tens of thousands of years was seen as a purifying force. At what moment was it no longer seen as that?
Whew. I mean, a lot of them. I mean, that's a big story. That's a big, long chapter of our human history. But it's one of those sentences that you can't unhear. Right? For tens of thousands of years, ecstasy was seen as a purifying force. And yet now, what do we think of now? Oh, sex, bad, wrong, sex stores, pornography, prostitution, vibrators, child porn. Like all we can see is the depravity and the perversion of what has happened as a result of sublimating these very healthy, very natural, very normal impulses. And I would even argue gifts that nature has installed inside of us. But if you don't express that, if you don't accept that part of you, if it's not heralded as sacred, as the sacred gift that it is, then it gets sublimated, it gets repressed. And this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about, is that I had this realization. I was in this ceremony once with some friends, and I was like, who said that this was bad? Who said this?
Who made the rules?
Yeah, who made these rules? And more importantly, why? Why have we all been trained to think that our sexuality is dirty or wrong, or that we're going to go to hell for pleasuring ourselves? Like, quite literally, who said and why? And so this summer, Layla and I went on a priestess pilgrimage. We went to Delphi, Eleusis, and Crete. Yeah. We went to these sacred ancient sites. And so what a year, right? To get to go to there, and then also to get to go to Egypt, all in a few months. Like, what a gift. And the codes that were installed from visiting these ancient places. But the reason why Layla and I went was very much a reclamation. It was to go to these sites where women and priestesses were serving not only plant medicine, but also leading sacred fertility rituals. So like helping people to tap into these heightened states of eros and ecstasy as a means by which to plug themselves into God, as a way to get closer to the divine, not to remove themselves from it. And so, and what's interesting specifically about Eleusis, and there's an amazing book on this called The Immortality Key by Brian Marescu, and he spent, have you read this book?
I'm familiar with it. Okay. Yeah, I have not read it yet.
Highly recommend. It's very, very good. But he spent 10 years basically researching in the Vatican Library and the Papal Library what was happening in Eleusis, what was happening in these sacred ancient rituals, because they went on for 3,000 years. And Eleusis is 45 minutes outside of Athens. And this was happening at the height of the Greco-Roman Empire. This was happening in the time of Euripides, Plato, Aristotle. These kings, these generals, these eventually emperors were going and experiencing the Eleusinian mysteries. They were going there to die before they died. Right? So again, what does meditation and pleasure and medicine all have in common? There are ways to die before you die. There are ways to practice connecting with all that is, so you don't feel exclusively identified to just your ego, just your body, just yourself. And what happens when you face death before you die is that it liberates you to really live, right? And you like the channel gets open, then it's like nature's able to use you as a vessel to deliver that fulfillment, because you remember that you are nature. You remember that you are God pretending to be human. And once you know that viscerally, you can't unknow it. And so what's so fascinating about this, and not to get too deep into the weeds, but the very civilization that was birthed out of these ceremonies then went on to become the colonial world order that then extracted so many of these rituals out of indigenous societies, and then were responsible for the Crusades and millions of women getting burned at the stake in witch burnings, and taking peyote away from Native Americans, and basically like anything that allowed you to viscerally remember that you were God got taken away and replaced with a church, a doctrine, a dogma, a religion. If you want to get to God, you got to come to our structure. You got to go through our middleman. You got to pay 10% to our organization. But these plants that are making you see God inside of your own brain, the internal chemistry that nature installed inside of you that's remembering, letting you remember how divine you are, that stuff is bad. That's a sin. That's dangerous. You're going to go to hell. And as a matter of fact, Pan, right? So like the Greek god Pan, and stop me if this is getting too woo woo.
Keep going, keep flowing.
So in almost every indigenous society, every ancient culture, there's like many faces of the divine, right? We were just in Egypt, right? There's Isis, Osiris, Sekhmet, like all these faces. If you look at Greek mythology, right? You have Demeter, Zeus, Artemis, Persephone, all of these different faces of the divine. You study the Vedas, Shiva, Lakshmi, Arjuna, you give all, again, and I don't even like to use the word polytheism, but it's like, because they're just myths, right? They're just fairy tales. But the myths matter, because we cannot be something if we cannot see something. And so if we took our definition of God from being multifaceted, multi-gendered, multi-attributed, right? Like Hanuman is a god, it's like a monkey god, and Hanuman is like mischievous. Pan was the god of wildness and hedonism and wine and sex. And Pan, interestingly, was like the goat god. He was half goat, half man, and he had horns and hooved feet. And so when Catholicism started, when we went from like Paleo Christianity, which is like sort of a hybrid between Christianity and this polytheistic way of or I guess you would call it paganism. When Catholicism was starting to like try and convert everyone into this one way of thinking, Pan was the hardest god for them to give up. Because they would go into the caves and they would have these like amazing wine-soaked hedonistic rituals and fertility rituals. And so it was like, they're fun. People are seeing the face of the divine in their own bodies. And so Pan was the hardest one for them to get to give up.
We won't throw this one out. This one will work.
But then so the way that they got people to renounce Pan was by turning him into the devil. Turning him into Satan. There is no mention of the devil or Satan in the Bible. It's Lucifer. Lucifer is a fallen angel. Satan and the devil was a modern invention, and that's why the devil has horns. It's why the devil has hooved feet, because they had to make people afraid of the God that they weren't willing to give up. And so when and how did we go from thinking that ecstasy was a purifying force to, it's a sin and bad and wrong? It's been a very deliberate, purposeful campaign that's been happening for tens of thousands of years to divorce us from our own divinity. And my theory there is why, right? Why did that happen? Because people who know how creative and powerful they are very hard to control. And it's the same with psychedelics, right? It's like each modality is like, you remember that you're God. And again, I think in the 70s, like Nixon, on the war on drugs, he said that the war on drugs will be the single most important war that we fight, that Timothy Leary is public enemy number one because he was giving people a way to democratize God. Well, God is already democratized. He was giving people a way to remember how democratized God actually is.
Yes. And we're sort of going through an uncovering right now, but the consciousness of the planet is different. So we're receiving all of these concepts much more open. And I think it's also why I think it was Mama Gina that was like warning you, like, you sure you want to talk about this? Like, be careful. And you've said that it's all only brought blessings into your life and people have received it. So when you made that leap of talking about the creative energy of the sexual energy, essentially what we're talking about, what is different now when people are receiving this?
I mean, I'm figuring it out. Like, I actually just did a podcast a couple weeks ago when I was in LA, and it was a really good friend. It was my third time being on the show, very popular podcast. And I sat down, and the first question he asked me is like, you've got a whole new body of work. What's Sacred Secret? And so we just like went down the rabbit hole. And at no point did I feel him wrangling me or getting nervous. And I felt like I was really doing a great job of explaining the science, because it's like a more scientific medical show. And then 3 days later, and I left and I was like super proud of it. And 3 days later, he called me and he's like, Emily, I love you so much, but we're not going to release the episode. And I was like heartbroken, and then ashamed and embarrassed and guilty. I the whole rainbow of emotions. And then I was like, hey, will you please send it to me? Send me the episode. And will you please be as honest as possible? Like, I want to know, what would have made this a win? What would have made it a 10 out of 10? What specifically do you think is too triggering for your audience? Like, where did I go too far? Because especially in the world of sexuality, imagine being at a bar and someone walking up to you that you've never met before and being like, hey, do you want to sleep with me? For most places, in most circumstances, that would be too far, too fast. I get this, sure. There's
all right, I won't try that. I won't try that anymore. I'm sorry, Emily.
Yeah. For most people, it's too far, too fast. And so it's the steps of intimacy really matter. You have the consent, baby steps. The evolution of intimacy really matters. And so I don't want to take people too far, too fast, because then the opposite happens, right? There becomes a fear-based contraction. Just when the body doesn't feel safe, it closes. And so part of what I think nature is tasking me to do is use my superpower of making esoteric tools accessible and attractive to a mainstream audience, but now do it for these more potent and taboo modalities like sacred sexuality. And so I'm basically framing this as an embodied manifesting tool. It's like, hey, you can utilize this energy to manifest not only your dreams, but the thing you want for the planet, the earth that you'd be proud to hand the next generation. And so I think framing it in that is helping. I also think that just my transmission, there's the feedback I get is that people feel really safe with me, that they trust me, that there's a lack of judgment. Even though I think I'm very judgmental. When I'm teaching, I think I'm not judgmental. There's a lot of unconditional love that comes through when I'm teaching. And I think that has made a safe space for people to explore. And the first time I sort of outed myself as a sex witch was on Aubrey Marcus's podcast. And his audience is so far down the woo rabbit hole that I think I got a bit of a skewed perception of it was just high five, you go girl. Can I book a private too? Let's go. And so perhaps as the audience is getting bigger, I may have to refine my delivery more. And I'm in the process of deciding where do I want to meet people? Because historically, I've really taken people from 0 to 1. I was speaking to people that didn't have a meditation practice and I was getting them started. I was really initiating them into this world. I think that I have evolved and my work has evolved. And I don't think I want to be the starting point anymore. I'm not taking people to 0 to 1 anymore. Now it feels more like 2 to 3. But anyway, this is not a branding conversation.
And even to go further into that of, in the past when, you said your superpower is also being able to feel into what's the next big thing. And, you started the world's first online meditation training in 2013. What I'm interested in is, with meditation, how you began that is you sort of wrapped meditation into this eye candy of, we mentioned it earlier, of better sex, more money. Now with this sex magic, it's the eye candy is manifest your dream life. But when people, so that's they'll go into it, you're reeling them in. What's the deeper layers of what they'll actually find with all of these practices?
Yeah, great question. So yes, the candy coating for meditation was more productivity. Like I basically built a whole career on reframing meditation as a performance and productivity tool. And I did that because of the energetics of what we were in. Like we were in this hyper masculine, hyper achievement, accomplishment oriented society. Now, like you said, the energetics of the planet are changing. They're moving into more of femininity or at least balance. God willing, Goddess willing. And
Inshallah.
and so that is one of receptivity, flow, alignment, magnetism, discernment. And so if I were building Ziva right now, I would not frame anything as a productivity tool. Like, because it's just, that's not where, like, I think our priorities have shifted. You know, again, from that near-death experience that we all went through, it's like, wait, I want to spend more time with my kids. I don't want to be on a train for 2 hours a day. I want to live in the woods. Like people were just like, we're facing like what really matters. Just like if you said, okay, I have 3 months to live, what are you going to do with those 3 months? You're going to do the things that really matter to you. And so now, and just to talk about the candy coating of Sacred Secret, like, yes, I'm framing here you can use this creation energy to manifest your dreams, because that's what happened for me. Like I was not willing to prioritize my own pleasure until I understood that it would fuel my mission. Because we're all steeped in this misogyny. We're all steeped in this conditioning that pleasure is bad and shameful and wrong. And so who am I to prioritize a bubble bath in the middle of a day? But certainly you could have a meeting with your ads manager and your board about your profitability, no problem, from 8 a.m. until 7 p.m. But like at what point are we prioritizing like taking care of and nurturing the body and making sure that we feel good? So that's like why this particular flavor of candy coating. But what is the medicine that people actually get? I think the medicine with meditation is hopefully obvious at this point. Like hopefully, even if you're not doing it, people understand that this is a direct route to connect you to source energy, to the source of time, to the source of bliss, to the source of fulfillment, to the source of creativity. Right? Like that is what meditation is doing. And if your meditation is not doing that for you, then please call me. Like stop listening to the guided YouTube videos and like actually learn a modality that's going to plug you into God. What happens with Sacred Secret is unlike anything I've ever seen. Like when you asked at the beginning of the podcast, what are you most excited about? And I said, it's these retreats, because it is like ayahuasca without the puking. It is like MDMA without the come down. And the amount of not only healing that's happening in the room with these people in these bodies, but the ancestral lineages that are being cleared through this work is unlike anything I have ever seen. Every time we do breath work, there's like a maternity ward in the room where people are rebirthing themselves, going through the births of their children, their unborn children, their miscarried children, their aborted children. And it's just like this wild, healing, ecstatic, like raw ceremony. And they're just breathing, right? Like they're just breathing. And then with the pleasure prayer ceremonies, which is basically where we are using our pleasure to pray, this is the thing that people are obviously the most scared of. They're the most freaked out about. It's the most nerve inducing going up to it. But then afterwards, like right after, everyone has built this energy, reminded themselves of how holy they are, and they're just listening to their soul, right? They're listening. Hey, nature, how would you love to use me? And what every single person reports is that the size of their dream increases. What they believe that they are capable of increases. And they're able to feel that dream as if it is a visceral reality, so that when the opportunities for the dream come, it doesn't feel so scary. It doesn't feel so make or break. And then the thing I'm maybe most proud of is that right afterwards is that people feel like it's the most normal, natural, almost like blasé, like passé thing that could be. They're like, oh yeah, of course. Like, of course, people have been using pleasure as part of ritual for thousands of years. Yes, of course, this has been happening to some degree in community for thousands of years. And by the way, I know that when I say these images, it probably evokes like images of like a hedonistic orgy or something. And that's not at all what's happening. It's like ceremonial.
I'm not going to sign up anymore.
You're like, I'm withdrawing my application. But it's candles. Everyone's in a deep meditation space. People are on their own mats, fully clothed, covered by a blanket. And it's basically about you and your soul. It's about you making love to your dream. And on the other side of it, it feels like so holy, so pure, so natural. And then people are like, yeah, that was the thing I was the most scared of. And it ended up being like, no big deal. And then the byproduct of that is a reclamation, right? It's like, oh, my body is mine. This pleasure is God-given. This pleasure is for me. It's not for my husband. It's not for my wife. It's certainly not for Instagram. It's not so I could sell stuff or buy stuff or get anything with it. It was installed in me for the purpose of enjoying it. And this is the thing I keep trying to communicate to everyone, is that the gods and goddesses need us as much as we need them. They don't have bodies. We are literally the hand of the divine. God can't drink your cacao. God can't make love to your girlfriend. God can't go to see the wrestling match or the Broadway show or the Super Bowl or whatever it is that you're into, whatever it is that entertains you. That's why we incarnated, because we thought it might be fun to have a body. And I think we just forget that along the way, because obviously the point of being human is not just the light. And as I said when I started this podcast, you're like, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm feeling really good. I've been in kind of a funk, but I'm coming out of it. And you're like, sometimes we go into the funk because it's fun to get out of the funk, right? And as Alan Watts so beautifully says, you can't see the white if it's only white. You have to put the speck of black on there. And you can't see the black when it's just black. You have to put the speck of white on there. So the yin and the yang is not just representing the balance of masculine and feminine, of give and receive. It is also representing the balance of the light and the dark, the pleasure and the pain.
And to piggyback off that, I read a quote of yours that said, if you don't have a means by which to remind yourself that fulfillment only exists inside of you, then almost all of your longings are addictive. And I'm starting to connect the dots that those means are the inherent gift that we were given to feel pleasure in our life. Because if we are essentially self-pleasuring, right? We can say masturbation, then there's no necessity to long outside of us. But at the same time, a lot of people will get addicted, and it's maybe not even addicted to the feeling, but then we can get into things like porn and things like that. So this inherent capability of us to feel pleasure and have a desire is so that we don't feel that we have to look outside of us and be addicted to longing, something that we'll never find outside.
Yes. Thank you so much for bringing this up. So this is a really, really important point. And it is the very differentiation that turns something from medicine into poison. So, and really the devil's in the dose, and the intention very much matters. You can poison yourself with water. You can kill yourself with water, and water is life. 100% be addicted to self-pleasuring, or you could use it as a ceremony to manifest the world's highest incarnation. Like truly, it's not about the thing. It's about the state of consciousness that you're in when you're using the thing and the intention. Food, right? There are many billions of people who are addicted to food, and yet we must eat in order to survive. Food is medicine. So it's not the modality, right? And thank you for sharing that quote of, if you do not have a way to remind yourself that you're already perfect, that you already have everything that you need, if you're not meditating or doing yoga or breath work or whatever it is that allows you to experience viscerally that the kingdom of heaven is within, then all of your desires are going to be addictive longings. But if you do have a practice of a way of fulfilling yourself internally through meditation or breath work or chanting or prayer or service, then you can trust your desires more. And the way I differentiate it is an addictive longing versus an intuitive desire. And if you are filling yourself up internally, flooding your own brain and body with dopamine and serotonin, then those desires are still there. It's like, well, why? I just meditated. I just reminded myself that I'm God pretending to be human. I just flooded my brain and body with dopamine and serotonin. I know viscerally now that nothing out here is going to make me or break me because I just made myself. And that I still want to sleep with that guy. I still want to make $1 million. I still want to buy that car. Why? Why do those desires exist? And I would argue that those desires then become an indicator of where nature wants to use you to deliver your fulfillment to the world, not where you need to go to fill yourself up. And that is a very important differentiation. If you are going through life, even manifestation can be an addiction if it's the I'll be happy when syndrome. Let me manifest a new car, a new boyfriend, a new whatever, because then I will be happy. That's addiction. That's filling an internal void with an external thing. Doesn't work. Versus I'm going to fill myself up from the source. And then I will use my desires as nature's GPS as to where she wants to use me to deliver my fulfillment. And then whatever happens along the way is perfect and meant, because I know that it's not the $1 million. It's not the guy. It's not the car that will make me happy. I'm already happy. That's just turn left, turn right, turn left, turn right. And then whoever I meet, whatever happens, whatever fulfillment I get to deliver along the way is the point.
And let's talk about when people go too far on the scale of, I don't need anyone outside of me to, pleasure me because I can do it myself. And you see a lot of that. I've heard a couple friends, women, say that to me. And it's interesting because I also heard you say that whenever there's two, therein lies God. So this importance of the sacred union, if you want to get into that. And also you talked about the evolution of intimacy, of knowing, when is, not going too fast, too soon, to all of that. So why is it important to have that union with another person or other people to also feel that essence of God?
Yeah, what a beautiful question. And so the way that I'm teaching pleasure prayer, like what I'm doing with Sacred Secret, I am right now teaching it to individuals because I've not done like a couples retreat or a couples workshop. And I do think it's important for people to first reclaim this energy and reclaim this pleasure for themselves. But then you can absolutely do it in partnership. You can 100% do pleasure prayer with your partner or partners, provided that it's consensual, provided that both people want to. And I would argue that it's even more potent when you're doing it with another person, because again, the antenna gets bigger. It's why I do this on retreat. It's why I do at-home retreats, because I have this theory that the more people we have in coherence with themselves and each other, the bigger the antenna gets. So like the original, and talk about a dream not being for the purpose of the dream. My original inspiration for all of this work is that I had a download, like this woman who's psychic, she's like, can I have permission to like tap in? And she put her hands on my legs and she's like, oh, and she saw me in the middle of a stadium. She's like, this is 80,000 people. It's Dallas Cowboy Stadium. You're on a round stage. There's all these women around you. And like, that's all she could see. And then the next week I downloaded like the entire run of show and I downloaded the entire recipe for Sacred Secret of like, visualize, alchemize, magnetize. And so I started working towards that. It was like, oh, we got to get 80,000 people in Dallas Cowboy Stadium. And just the audacity of that dream had so much magnetism in it. And it brought so many people and so many opportunities to me. But now that's not the dream anymore. Like the dream has evolved. So like the point of the dream was not Dallas Cowboy Stadium. The point of the dream was to get me to birth this modality and all the people that I met because of the audacity of that dream. And now the dream is evolving into something new, which involves sacred sites and activations, places maybe like the pyramids. But it's just a friendly reminder to allow people to detach from the outcome, right? That the dream isn't there so that you can acquire it. The dream is there so that you can evolve into who you need to be to birth that dream and for whatever happens on the way. God's not a short order cook, right? So I know I veered off from your actual question. So it was like the importance of other people. And so yes, you can do these practices by yourself. I would argue that they are stronger with someone else. And that the whole game here, again, like the whole reason that we incarnated is to fall in love with ourselves. And this is something like, I say the quote I am most proud of, and the thing that Robert Edward Grant quotes me on all the time, is if I had to sum up the Vedas into one sentence, it would be this: the one became two for the joy of becoming one again. Right? Like the one became two for the joy of becoming one again. So the nothingness became somethingness, because it's fun to remember that we all were born out of the same thing. So falling in love with someone, You love chocolate. I love chocolate. You love breath work. I love breath work. You love this podcast. I love this podcast. Like we're just falling in love with ourselves through the appearance of separateness. We're just remembering that, oh, right, we're all these different waves on this giant ocean of consciousness. And so it's, and then of course there's a million ways to fuck that up along the way. Codependence, dependence, trauma bonding, like all of it. And so I would really argue that the point of relationships is to teach us our lessons, right? So that we can heal and integrate into wholeness all of the stuff that is not wholeness. And then dream case is that we usher ourselves into a state of consciousness that is so filled with the frequency of unconditional love, so pure, that we could actually love ourselves enough that we could fully see someone else for the beauty of who they are. And then, God willing, that person loves themselves and is whole in and of themselves enough to see this other person. And according to Zach Bush and according to A Course in Miracles, if we could have that divine union, that balance of masculine and feminine, it only takes two people. It only takes two people in that state of consciousness to create a ripple effect of healing on the entire planet. And I think that is why the stories about Jesus and Christ consciousness, that 3,000 years later, we are still talking about that. It is because of the frequency of pure love. And I believe it was because of the frequency of Mary Magdalene. And that it was not just Jesus, it was the relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, that they were both in these very elevated consciousness, and that they were able to create a level of healing that we are still talking about. And yet Mary Magdalene got removed from the history books, like quite literally ripped, the pages ripped out of the books, the tablets etched blank. And we have purposefully and sometimes violently removed the divine feminine from our mythology. And I think that we are seeing the ramifications of that on the planet. We're seeing what happens when we just value one over the other. And so the exciting news here is not to get pissed that it was ripped out, okay? Because I mean, sure, like go through the phases of anger and rage and all of that. But let's get to excitement for of the magic, the untold magic that is possible when we start to infuse the divine feminine back into ourselves, back into our relationships, and back into our relationship with the planet. Because I really believe that that level of miracle, that level of magic, that level of like untold ripple effect is what is required for us to face the challenges that we are facing as a species. And I think it's the thing that's going to make it, dare I say, pleasurable.
And Emily, what did the goddess Isis teach you about the divine feminine?
So I did not really know who Isis was. I had heard about her here or there. I really only understood Isis to be, the terrorist cell. And so when I hear that word, it was like a little triggering to me. And then at my birthday party 3 years ago, my amazing cosmic partner, Adam, threw me this ceremony. And it was a surprise. It was a surprise party. I mean, I knew people were there, but the ceremony part was a surprise. And he had 24 of my best friends. We're in this farmhouse upstate. And he basically initiated me as the high priestess of embodied joy. And at first blush, it looked like a cute theme party. Like, oh, like adorable, like cute. Everyone's doing like a ritual. But the people that were at this party were like not a joke. It was like very world-class witches and wizards and healers. And he had everyone bring like an offering for the altar, a spell. They had to write a spell book. He had this thing hand calligraphied into a handmade leather-bound book. He got me a magic wand, and everyone
went all out. Like, I'm taking notes.
Like light, sound, set. Like it was like an off-Broadway level production of a ceremony. It ended up being a real initiation. And then, we have Layla Martin, Regina Thomasschauer, Radha Agarwal, like these amazing humans, like world-class facilitators, initiating not only me, but everyone in the group. And to this day, some of them say that it was the most profound spiritual experience of their entire lives. And so that, and then what he had done in the building of this makeshift temple was all Isis iconography. He had an Isis candelabra, this Isis tapestry. He got me a book of Isis oracle decks, the Alana Fairchild Isis oracle deck. And so it felt like as he was initiating me as the high priestess of embodied joy, he was actually initiating me into the lineage of Isis, even if it was sort of an accident. But ever since that day, I have this very deep, very visceral, very real connection with her. And And I feel like I can sort of call on her or invoke her almost any time. And I've never had such a personal relationship with the divine. I've never anthropomorphized God the way that I do with Isis. And so now I get it when people have like it made me have a lot more compassion for like hyper religious people. Because I was like, oh, I get it. Like, this is a real friend to you. Like, this is as real as your cousin or your brother. And so if that anthropomorphization of God is attached to a dogma or a doctrine, I can understand why you're using this as a tool of sometimes judgment, right? Where I like my flavor of spirituality is like anything that's moving us away from judgment and into more acceptance. Maybe that's just because I'm very judgmental, and that's the medicine I need to work on. Anyway, back to your original question: what has Isis taught me about the divine feminine? Isis is one of the few female depictions of a god or a goddess that is both like in her own power and in her own beauty and sexuality, and also a mother. And if you even think about it, like you've got Mother Mary and the Mary Magdalene, one is the virgin mother and one is a whore. First of all,
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene was so far from a whore, it's comical, right? Like she was actually a descendant of and a disciple of Isis. She was deeply trained in Tantra. She was a Tantrika. And so she was able to help to harness creation energy, and she was able to teach those to Jesus. So, I mean, this is all based on the Magdalene manuscripts by Tom Kenyon, but they talk about the practices that Yeshua and Mary Magdalene would do together. And that it was actually his ability to harness this life force of like why he could come out of the cave days later after people thought that he was dead, which by the way, there are people in India that can do that right now. They take their resting heart rate down to where they're almost dead, and they're in, they're in caves for weeks and then they come out. So it's not unheard of that these ancient tools have been utilized. And also, according to Zach Bush, there's like 3 years in the Bible that we can't account for. Yet you don't know where Mary Magdalene and Jesus were. And he argues that they were actually in Egypt and in India. So it all like comes full circle to the Vedas and to Isis. So what Isis has taught me about the divine feminine is that you can be fully in your sexual power, that you can fully own your sexuality as a mystical, magical, holy force, and you can be fully in your expression as a mother, and that arguably they feed each other. And that has certainly been my journey over the past 3 years. And it's been just like the wildest, most magical ride I could imagine.
Beautiful. And you talked about the ancient sites. We were recently in Egypt together, as we mentioned, and we know that these sacred sites were built on energetic ley lines on the planet to harness the energy. And you could even feel it going into something like the King's Chamber, the center, the heart of the Great Pyramid. And I was wondering, because you said that when you're alongside another person, your antenna gets bigger if you're having these practices. How does the antenna get bigger while you're having this in your awareness of pleasure and practicing it and bringing that energy up while you're in a sacred site? If you want to share maybe something that you went through in the King's Chamber, which I was in an altered state, but also witnessing everyone around, and we were just in another dimension. I feel we were
yeah. Well, I think I'd like to start just from purely like pure curiosity of like what did you witness? Like, what did you see? Because sometimes it's hard for me to see things when I'm in it, when I'm in that other space, in that channel space. And I don't know, you could have been on your own ride and your own journey, but if you did witness any of that, I'm curious what you saw.
I witnessed a lot of liberation in your energy. While there was a moment where I was going to walk into the into the sarcophagus, and I was one of the last people to get in, and I also got to witness a lot of people in their experience and hold space for that. And when I got out of it, and it was just like a whole like vibration in there, and I was just feeling tingly for about 30 minutes afterwards. I witnessed, there was this beautiful union, while you were in there. And I witnessed when you put your head against Zach's head, and it was just like the most beautiful thing I witnessed in that experience. So I was really curious to know what liberated in you, and how you were using these practices and this mentality to shift whatever you were going through.
Yeah. So I think, you said what I'm most excited about it is this balance of masculine and feminine. And so much of that was kicked off by the Egypt experience. And the King's Chamber was one of our first nights. And just to give people a little bit of a context, I don't know how much you've shared on the show, it was about 42 of us, all amazing healers, channelers, musicians, sound healers, and doctors, artists, poets, channels. And it was, each of us got to lay in this sarcophagus. And Robert Edward Grant knew the frequency to tone so that he could activate the healing powers of the whole pyramid. So it was a very intense, beautiful, spiritual ceremony that was happening. And I've actually never experienced anything like that night. And what was so special is that it felt like a full temple space, that we were in full ceremony, but there was no leader. There was no priest or priestess. Everyone was priests and priestesses. Everyone, it was this communal, circular, give and receive, heal and be healed ceremony unlike anything I've ever witnessed. Just this divine improvisational dance. And so at one point in there, because I was one of the first people into the sarcophagus. And so afterwards I just kind of stood back and was taking in the room. And at a certain point I saw Zach, and it's his story to tell, but he was in almost like a Christ position. His arms went out as if he was on a cross, and he and Matthias, there was an exchange happening, and who knows what Matthias was doing. Matthias is doing his special flavor of magic.
We'll have to ask him.
But come to find out that there was an installation of a frequency of Christ consciousness, right? Which is available to all of us. Christ consciousness is pure love, unconditional love, generosity, right? And so there was an installation of that. And then something in me just felt very drawn to go to Zach. And I went behind him, and I just kept putting my fingers into the center of his palms, where nails would have been. And by the way, I had no idea what he and Matthias were doing. I didn't know there was anything, but I was putting my fingers into where nails would have been in his hands and just pushing really hard. And then his body would go back into this state, and I caught his head, and I was holding his head, and he didn't know it was me. He didn't know who it was behind him. He thought it was a man because he was who has the wingspan? No woman has the wingspan to meet my hands, but I'm a pretty large lady. So anyway, I was but then after that, our friend Vailana needed some support, and not needed, but just was in an experience, and I chose to support her for my own pleasure, really. And then after that,
I went right after Zach and Vailana. And I got to witness both of them in their individual experiences, which was the most beautiful thing as well to watch. So, you got to get what happened after that, and then I went in.
So there was charged up juju in there. So I was holding Vailana in my lap while she was continuing her process. And then after that, I had been giving quite a lot. And I was like, Emily, your whole intention of coming on this trip was to receive. Why don't you just lay back? And so I literally just laid down on the ground. And this is unusual for me. I'm more comfortable when I'm in charge, when I'm giving, when I'm in control. There is a wounded masculine part of me that holds on too tight. And so it was when you say about liberation, even laying down, I'm not going to help anyone. I'm not going to give anything. I'm just going to lay down and see what happens. And then our friend Kevin came over, and he started holding space. And the next thing I knew, someone's head was up against my head, and I didn't know who it was. But there was this activation that happened, like a catalyst, like a circuit got closed somehow. And my body started going into pretty intense energy activations. I started speaking in some what I would call light language. So light language is not really a language from this planet. It's just an energetic form of pure emotion. It kind of transcends the left brain. Speaking in light language, and my light language oftentimes comes through my hands. My hands will start moving. And I would also say dance is more of my light language because I've been a dancer since I was 8. So it's very easy for me to go into a channeled space with my body. But I was laying down, and so I wasn't really dancing, but my body was being moved as if spirit was fully animating my body and what was coming through. And then Vailana came over, and she started singing. And so that was a real amplifying force. And then I opened my eyes, and Matthias is over us. And it's just this whole solar system that seems to be forming. And afterwards, we all started laughing hysterically and opened our eyes, and it felt like this massive energy came through, and this massive energy was released. And there was probably 0.01% of me was like, I wonder what this looks like. I wonder if I'm freaking anyone out. Certainly we had like the Egyptian Muslim guards in there watching us, who I'm sure the whole night were like, what the actual F is going on? But I was aware that like being in anything close to like a sacred sexuality or erotic expression is very much not allowed in Egypt. Like, the male wound is very strong there, and anything that gets too magical gets shut down. So I'm amazed that we were able to do what we did in that chamber. But if there was a moment of like liberation, it was just like the trusting the purity of that transmission, and me, myself, not being in judgment of it, and knowing that anyone that was witnessing it would get whatever medicine that they were meant to receive, even from witnessing it. And then for me, it's not going into performer mode, right? It's like really just allowing the channel to be pure and not doing it for anyone else. Just allowing the codes to be installed. So I actually texted Matthias afterwards and I was like, hey, just out of curiosity, like what did you see was happening there? Like what was your experience of that? And if you want, I can find the message. Maybe you can vamp for a moment because I think it's worth.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll edit. We'll edit
okay.
until you get to find it.
Okay. He said, you were both creating an atom, a force of creation, like spinning energetically like a galaxy. And I went to see if it was balanced. And when I felt it was complete, I got a seed from the void of the black hole, a seed or a spark. And then I went to sow it in the sarcophagus as another key.
I saw that. I saw that.
So like that's the journey.
I saw when he went like this, like on top of you guys. And then he was obviously in channel state. He walked into the sarcophagus and like laid it. And he like dropped it in. Yeah. Dropped the mic. He's like
and so it felt like what we were experiencing was a microcosm of what, or maybe not even a microcosm, maybe a seed planting the possibility for like this divine masculine, this divine feminine balance on the planet, that we could both be so healed and balanced inside of ourselves to then activate and strengthen that balance inside of the other person. And then the ripple effect that happens as a result of that. And that's Zach's hypothesis of what is like needed on the planet right now. And so, who knows, but it was certainly it certainly felt like a gift to be in that moment, in that time.
And on the last day, we went to Abu Rawash, and these are these destroyed pyramids that we don't know what happened to them, but according to Robert, these would have been the tallest, the largest pyramids on the plateau, or alongside the northwest of Egypt, and they represent the pituitary and the pineal gland. And there was a moment afterwards, we did an insane activation there, and then the group sort of got separated. Some people went to the top and then some went to the bottom. I was on the bottom, you were on the top. So I was wondering, I didn't get to witness, you said you led something in that space. What was going on there?
Yeah. So according to Robert, like the inspiration for the Egypt trip was to go and activate the throat chakra, like the throat chakra of the planet being this particular pyramid. And just for anyone who's not familiar with Robert's work, he discovered a new like chamber inside of the pyramid based on Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. And so if you look at the chakras or the energy centers of the Vitruvian Man, they line up with the chambers of the pyramids. And so he was like, there's the heart, there's the sacral, there's the brain, but there was no throat chamber. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but even then one of the team of Japanese scientists, they heat mapped it and they discovered a new tomb inside of these 3,000-year-old studied to the hilt pyramids. And so now Robert, and that's why he has such access. That's why he was able to bring us there. And so, anyway, the point, my understanding of this trip was to activate the throat chakra of the planet and of the species, to like open up the connection between the head and the heart. And it felt like that's very much what we were doing the whole time, singing, expressing so much activation between heart and head. And then on the last day, these pyramids, as I understand, if the Great Pyramid of Giza is like 300 meters, this one would have been 500 meters and on a taller plateau. So by a lot larger and higher, and also made out of rose quartz, which is interesting because rose quartz is the crystal of love. And at some point, some way, somewhere, it exploded. Like right now, it doesn't look like a pyramid. It just looks like a pile of rubble. and yet, but you can see the rose quartz all over. And this is apparently the crown chakra, like as you said, the pituitary and pineal, but also representative of the crown chakra. And so Robert, while we're there, we're going up to the top, and he asked me, he's like, will you lead something up on the top? And I was like, sure. And so I did this thing called the lifegasm breath, which is something I teach inside of Sacred Secret, where I have people, breathe, like exhale all the way to empty, and then basically do a breath where they pull all of the breath and energy up from the hoo-ha into the heart, into the head. And then they squeeze their root and they squeeze all that cerebral spinal fluid up into their heads. And then what happens is the pituitary and pineal gland, they meet in something called the Hall of Brahman. So inside of our brains, there's a chamber called the Hall of Brahman, which is great because back to the Vedas, Brahman totality, all that is. And the pituitary and the pineal, one looks like a penis and one looks like a womb, right? And so in these heightened states, you can build enough energy and you can pull that cerebral spinal fluid up to where your brain can actually have an orgasm, to where the pituitary starts to secrete melatonin, which is the precursor to DMT, which is the God particle. So when I say like turn up the dial in your own divinity, I don't mean like in a euphemistic sense. I mean actually increase the God chemistry that is available inside of your brain. And so I led that lifegasm breath a few times for people. And, people had, some people felt nothing. Some people felt like they orgasmed in their brains. Some people's bodies started shaking. So it was, a wild, beautiful experience. But Robert, said it like we're the first people to go there and like the first people to do an activation in modern times. And so it felt like a real honor to like activate that crown while we were there with such amazing people on our last day. But meanwhile, there was all kinds of crazy shenanigans happening down in the bottom. So I'd love to hear what your journey was.
Yeah, so I was very perceptive to what was going on afterwards, because there was a moment where the guards, we mentioned how the guards were witnessing everything. They sort of, I just felt how their energy was more like, we need to leave quick. This like, you guys need to stop. So that's when, a group started going up. The guards were not really okay with it. And there was a few people that were in full trance channel. And so I kind of felt like a calling or a pull to like stay with those people that were there and sort of hold off in a way the guards, or like sort of talk to them like, don't talk to them because they're not in the state. Like just leave them be for a minute while you guys were on the top. So it was more like a holding space of a couple of people that were doing their work, whatever they were doing. And also I sat down next to Alan Green at one point. We were just witnessing everything that was going on. We were just like, plus it was like almost sunset, like a beautiful time. And I saw like there was a circle of you guys up on the top of the pyramid. And I was just like sitting back, witnessing just the beauty of everything. I had never been that present in my life in a long time. And it was just funny because the circumstances were like, we're with these guards. They don't know what's happening. All these things are going on at the same time. So it was like sensory overload. And I'll probably get into this with an upcoming show we have with Matthias, but we in the bus, I sat next to him and he was just coming out of his channel state and just holding space for that, and just witnessing what he was going through. Also, me and Matthias were one of the few people that could speak Spanish on the trip, and he says that when he comes out of that state, the languages come in like short segments, so English won't come online until after. So he could only speak Spanish for a little bit, which it was coincidental that I sat next to him because he was sort of expressing to me what sort of he was going through. But it was a amazing, beautiful day, experience, trip. So much to unpack.
And talk about like, birthing the new earth. Like it did feel like this microcosm of what would it look like? Like, what would it look like if there was the frequency of heaven on earth? What would it feel like? And yes, I know that like all communes are great when they're small. It's when they get big that things get tricky. And not that this was in any way a commune, but there was this frequency of collaboration and give and take and reciprocity and aligned vision And I like to believe that seeds got planted for what is possible. And it feels like since then, I've been much more clear on my mission in my work. And it is simply to bring the frequency of heaven to earth through whatever means. It doesn't matter the modality so much. Okay, is it meditation? Cool. Is it plant medicine? Cool. Is it on retreat? Cool. Is it on the Instagram live? Cool. But it's just like keep bringing the frequency of heaven to earth.
And on the last dinner, we actually got the opportunity to have one of the DJs that were there. And you brought up dance a little earlier. And that's something that I'd like to share sort of my experience with that, because I lived almost all my life until my late teens in the US, in California. And you know how, in the parties in high school over there were just literally all you would do is go and grind, right? You'd be like grinding against someone. That's all it was. That's how we expressed in our bodies. And then at 16, my parents said, we're moving back to Colombia, where, my parents are originally from, where I'm originally from. And I went to my first party there. Kids, it was like, we were like 15 or 16. People had already had a lot of experience drinking, and I was a little bit further behind. I had to catch up to them in that aspect. And I remember going into the first party, and this like music I had never heard before, or like it was salsa, merengue, just a lot of this Latin music that requires you to move your body a lot and in a very coordinated fashion. Mm-hmm. And I remember just like shutting down in that first party, just like shutting down. I didn't know what to do. And all I knew how to do was just, start drinking a lot and like numbing that awkwardness that I was feeling. Mm-hmm. And so that initial trauma with dance has always been very present for me. And, being in Egypt with all of you guys and seeing how you all were like moving your bodies. And I was just like, still like, I didn't really know what to do with my body because of that wound with the expression of dance in my body. So it was very interesting and liberating as well to witness, for example, you and Garen and all of you guys were just like going off with your moves. And I was like, feeling a little bit of that, wound of when we suppress that energy. Yeah. And that's something that I'm still working on, but I'd love to hear your experience with dance and how that's really healed you and helped you channel that energy.
Well, I'm happy to share, and I'm curious, like, what are you doing? Like, what's your relationship with dance right now? Like, are you titrating it? Are you doing it in a safe environment on your own? Do you have a partner? Like, what's your relationship with it now?
It's like when I'm solo or when I'm in a safe environment, I really allow myself to, move the way I want to. But when I get into like a bigger social setting where I feel like eyes are on me, I kind of just freeze. So it's interesting. Yeah. And so what I might recommend is just like you would with any trauma healing, right? You don't want to take yourself past the point of comfortability, right? You don't want to like violate your threshold of tolerance, because then it'll just re-traumatize or re-wound or shut it down more. But it's like, could you do 30 seconds? It's like 30 seconds of like letting it rip. And then you like go and like take some breaths or like go into the sofa or the cuddle puddle or something. And then the next party is at 1 minute, and just like as if you would a poison, like where you just take like a tiny little bit of it to build up the antibodies. And just like titrate it and always staying within your window of tolerance if this is something that you desire to reclaim for yourself, which it sounds like you are. But for me, dance is the opposite. Like for me, dance is like the most easy, natural channel. Like I've always feel like when I'm dancing, it is nature puppeting me. It's not me doing it, which is interesting because I grew up. I mean, I was on Broadway for 10 years. I was in dance class since I was 8 years old. And certainly, and I think that I was literally a professional dancer. And to me, professional is like your technique is so good that you transcend the technique. And I do think that I got there with dance, where I had the strength and the vocabulary and the dexterity. I could do tap or ballet or jazz or musical theater. And then at a point when I stopped dancing on Broadway, and certainly then having been meditating for many years and now like all these different channeling practices, because that technique is so strong,
it's like a fun puppet for nature to animate, right? Like I imagine nature must like using my body because of what it can do. And because I've practiced getting out of the way, specifically with dance. Now, interestingly, you could argue that I've done the same. I've been doing voice lessons since I was 8 years old. And so I've the same level of training with singing, but not the same natural gift. And so I'm like an okay singer, but not great.
Wait, I heard you the whole week. That is not an okay singer.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. Delete, delete, delete. I am an angelic singer if I choose to let the angels sing through me. And actually that is you're right. I am selling an old story because that did change for me in Egypt. There was, and one of my intentions in going was to reclaim my voice. Like we were going to activate the throat chakra. It was like, reclaim your voice, Emily. Like you did it for dance. Like, cause when you're on Broadway, you're doing other people's dances, other people's choreography, singing other people's words, saying other people's words. And so now, like, as I'm moving into this different phase of my life, it's like, I want to sing my music. I want to dance my dance. I want to speak my words. And certainly with speaking, like I do that, like I'm able to be a channel and speak to the audience. And with dance, I'm able to do it. And so with voice, it was a big intention. And that was a gift that when we came out of the King's Chamber, no less than 15 people came up to me and was like, oh my God, Emily, your voice is so beautiful. Oh my God, Emily, your voice is so beautiful. I remember sitting on the bus and just crying because I've had such a checkered relationship with my voice. It's caused me so much stress and trauma and pain and anxiety. And so that did feel like a reclamation.
I love that. Just and also it's an invitation for people to reclaim anything. You touched on yours, which was the voice. Mine was, in that instance, the dance. But I feel like even people are reclaiming their own bodies in the sexual environment. And a lot of, shut down, a lot of trauma around that, which is, I guess, a whole nother podcast that we could open up down the line. One of the last topics I wanted to get in with you is you had an intervention, I would call it, on Aubrey's podcast, where, you would reflect back to him something that I guess it was in a subconscious belief, and he would only respond, see truth. See truth, see truth. And I did it alongside you guys, and because I shared a lot of what he mentioned that he was going through with that belief of, having to do more and more, not feeling that you're, doing enough.
Yeah.
And I'd love to ask you, how do you see truth the most?
Like what allows me to see the most truth?
Yeah.
Detachment. There's a beautiful line in the Vedas that says that the truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing. The truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing. And so if we're in that addictive longing, I'll be happy when I'm not already enough, I don't have enough, then the lens through which we perceive everything is clouded by that longing. But if you can get to that detachment that is afforded to us by tapping into the fulfillment in the only place that it resides, which is inside of us, and in the only time that it resides, which is right now, then we afford ourselves the gift of detachment. And through that lens, we can actually see the truth.
Beautifully said, Emily. We end every podcast with a segment called the Final Trio, which are sort of rapid fire questions that you can answer in any way that you want. But before that, I'd love to guide people into connecting more with your work. We know your podcast is coming up again with a season 2. So if you want to send people to where to listen to you, where they can get access to your retreats, and just to connect with you further.
Yeah. So thanks for mentioning. So the podcast is called Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? Because that's very much my transition. Like I found meditation and I was like, why isn't everyone doing this? I found sacred sexuality. I'm like, why isn't everyone doing this? So I get to interview all these amazing people like Robert Edward Grant and Aubrey Marcus and Zach Bush and Blue and Vailana and all of our friends and pals about the thing that has changed their life the most, the thing that they found that is so good that they genuinely thought why isn't everyone doing this? And then we also get to talk about the societal conditioning of why. Like, why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we voting? Why aren't we composting? Why aren't we using our pleasure to pray? So I'm really proud of it. We debuted a top 10 in our first season, and season 2 is coming out really soon. So that's anywhere you stream podcasts. And then for anyone that wants to learn meditation, learn the Ziva technique, or learn Sacred Secret, all of that can be found at zivameditation.com. And Ziva is Z-I-V-A. It's a Sanskrit word that means bliss. So zivameditation.com. And then there's a free masterclass that goes pretty deep into the neuroscience of what makes Ziva different. Because we didn't talk too much about meditation, which, thank you. Like, I love meditation, and I've been talking about it for 16 years. But if you want to know the neuroscience, it's zivameditation.com/podcast. That's totally free. It's about an hour-long masterclass, and it'll really give you an in-depth understanding as whether or not Ziva is for you. And all the retreats, like the Sacred Secret retreats in Costa Rica and the masterminds, all of that is all at zivameditation.com.
And all of that is below on the description. We have all the links in there right now, so everyone can head over there. For the final trio, the first 2 questions are personalized to the guest, and then the last one we ask at the end of every single show. So the first one is, what is the latest evidence of magic that you witnessed in your life?
Ooh. The latest evidence of... Oh, okay. There's a big one, but I can't say it.
The smaller one. The smaller one.
Okay. Okay. So when I said I'm doing my work on like healing the masculine and feminine, I have, and this might be in my relationship, because like nothing tests us as much as our romantic relationships, right? And so in my romantic relationship, it's very judgmental and pointing and blaming and like you, like if you just fix this, then if you go to therapy, I'll be happy. Like the old adage. I was very committed to being right and very committed to my story, like more so than usual. And finally, I like came to my senses, and I was like, Emily, like this is you. Like it's all you. Like you're either gonna heal this stuff internally or not. And so I basically humbled myself, and I was like, all right, like I have to heal my relationship with the divine. Like I gotta heal my daddy issues, or like it doesn't, like this is not going away. It's nobody else. It's just me. I am creating this reality. And so once I humbled myself and got on my knees and was like, please help me heal. Give me the tools, I'm willing to do what it takes. And then instantly the relationship was like it just transformed into this beautiful thing. And it was just like high five from nature, like all these amazing world leaders being like, I'm so glad we met and we've got to build a temple together, and like magic on magic on magic. And so it just felt like, oh yeah, whenever you're trying to blame someone else for your shit, like clean your own house.
The motto for this podcast is all paths lead inward.
Yeah.
So everywhere you go, everywhere you look, it's just leading you back to you.
There you are.
The second question is, what would your soul love right now? Which is what you ask when you are doing your manifestation and meditations, is asking, what would your soul love right now?
To remember how safe it is. Yeah, really like remember, like I'm safe. Like all of the fear, all of the holding, like it's not real. Like my soul wants me to remember that. Like just feel safe and held inside of my own body.
Powerful. Thank you. The last question, Emily, we call the time capsule question, and it requires us to travel out a bit into the future, around 15 to 20 years down the line. I chose this time frame because it is going to be a time where the younger generations now are going to be stepping into more leadership positions around the world and really restructuring the systems and really leading in their own way as the consciousness is shifting on the planet. And they're going to need a lot of guidance, wisdom from people like you, people that come on this show. I call you guys paradigm shifters. And in this time capsule, you're given an opportunity to create a time capsule for these leaders that they're going to open down the line. And when they open it, they're going to get a transmission or guidance or tools or whatever you want to include in there. It doesn't have to be anything physical. It could be non-physical. It could be a frequency, an energy, or a teaching, or even just a word, whatever comes to mind. This is infinite possibilities. And it's going to have your name on it, and they're going to open it and receive whatever you left behind for them. So what would you put inside of this time capsule?
If I had to go really simple, it was just like on a little tablet, it would be feel good, place the order. Right? That would be the simple one. But the first thing that came up when you asked the question was remembering just how powerful each one of us is. And what I mean by that is that like all of the empire, if you will, all the systems that will continue to crumble with increasing speed, that every time we are afraid of them or resist them or talk about them, that we're just giving them more attention, that we're like building up that deck of cards. And then we've built up that deck of cards so much with so much fear and so much resistance that it seems insurmountable. But that it's just a deck of cards. And so that actually every time you choose to put your attention on that which you wish to birth, every single time you choose to put your attention on watering the flowers instead of watering the weeds, you're not only removing one card from this deck of cards, but you're putting another one into the deck of cards that you want to build. And it doesn't take that many people shifting their energy that many times before that empiric deck of cards starts to crumble and you have a pretty solid infrastructure going on the new earth that you want to birth. So the advice would be, do not lose sight of how powerful you are as an individual and how each action, how each recalibration is birthing the frequency of heaven on earth. And then do not underestimate how that can be amplified when you start to do it in groups.
And that's why we're here. Emily Fletcher, you are a powerful, magnetic being of light. It's been such a pleasure just getting to know you. Witnessing you in your play, in your laughter, in your wisdom, in your priestess, all of it. So it's just an honor and a pleasure to just continue this beautiful friendship that has been seeded through this experience, through this conversation, and hopefully many, many more. Yes. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you for having me. This is one of the best, certainly one of the most prepared interviews I've ever had, and also so fun. And thank you for making it a ceremony. You're such a gift, and I really, really enjoyed this. And I think our prayer of people getting the medicine that they are ready for, no more, no less, I will hold that intention moving forward.
It was received. Thank you so much.